and we became a democratic republic. But it has not. Sadly, it continues to be in the directive principles, and it is not the order of the day. That is one very, very strong reality. The second very interesting aspect about Indian situation is restitution of conjugal rights. Now, conjugal rights are a given circumstance in any marriage, and while it is understood to be so in all marriages across the world, but the remedy of restitution of conjugal rights, which is available under the Indian legal system to a spouse who has been deserted by the other spouse, is again something that is very peculiar to the common law system. In fact, this started in the English law, and it was in all the colonies it had this system. But while the England and the rest of the colonies have done away with it, in our system we continue to file Section 9 petitions for restitution of conjugal rights, and that continues to be a remedy that is available under the matrimonial laws in India. Interestingly, restitution of conjugal rights also has the dubious distinction of being the only decree or judgment that you can get from the court, but you can't get it executed. So, to my mind, I think this is the only decree that can be legally passed by a court, but you cannot get it executed. The third aspect that we need to understand is the kind of dowry laws that we have. Dowry is a very peculiar social evil that we have, and the kind of dowry laws and the cruelty laws that we have, whether it is under 498A of the IPC or under the Dowry Prohibition Act, or now under the Domestic Act, is an extremely serious issue. But at the same time, these special laws that were framed to ensure better protection and safety of women in matrimonies, and especially in abusive matrimonies, there is a huge clamor about growing misuse and abuse of these laws in India. Unfortunately, our criminal justice system takes a lot of time in separating the grain from the chaff, and often false cases, even if false cases are foisted in matrimonial matters, they also take years and decades and sometimes even longer to get sorted. That is another very important peculiar circumstance of India. The other issue is, like I was mentioning, adultery continued to be a criminal offense, an IPC offense under the Indian law for the entire period from 1860, when IPC was made by Macaulay. Almost 2 years back, when adultery was finally struck off from the Indian Penal Code as being completely unconstitutional, completely arbitrary, discriminatory, and the language of the Honorable Supreme Court in that judgment is extremely out that to treat women as chattel by the men is completely unacceptable, and it cannot stand on its legs in today's date and time. Another interesting development I must mention is the amendment in the rape laws that we saw after the Nirbhaya's case. We all know that Nirbhaya's case became a tsunami of uprising for sexual offences against women, and that was one case which actually got the whole nation standing up together on its toes and saying enough is enough. It led to significant amendments in the rape laws, and for the purpose of marital rape, some of the most significant amendments that were made were to the definition of rape. And initially, the definition of rape was a very, very narrow definition. Because of that narrow definition, the kind of arguments that had to be done in court to establish rape used to be bordering on absurdity. But after the expanded definition of rape, which went on to include other kinds of physical contacts also into the definition of rape, and expanded the definition to, in fact, it was almost like it took a cue from Nirbhaya's case, and all the gruesome incidents that had been done to that brave, courageous girl were included, and it was ensured that there are no loopholes. Interestingly, that amendment has also happened only in the year 2013. So for a very long time, the rape laws in India, even under the Indian Penal Code, had a very strict definition, and which had to be, of course, like all crimes, had to be established beyond shadow of reasonable doubt. But that definition was extremely constrictive and restrictive definition. Now, another very significant peculiarity of India is that if you go on any of the matrimonial portals, you will realize that all prospective grooms, all prospective alliances, when they are looking for alliance, matrimonial alliance, then they are all drawing handsome salaries or handsome earnings they have. But interestingly, we have seen the reality is that as soon as there is matrimonial trouble, matrimonial differences between the parties, that person very quickly shifts from somebody who's earning very handsome salaries and very handsome earnings to somebody who is barely able to get by in his life, barely able to make his ends meet, almost becomes a pauper, and it's all for the purpose of trying to scuttle the proceedings of maintenance and alimony which are foisted. So these are various angles of an Indian perspective. Of course, if we see from the international perspective, it is very clear that marital rape has been included in most of the developed nations, and also several significant developing nations. The significant number of over 130 nations speaks volumes. That marital rape is taken as an illegality. Marital rape is taken in an exceedingly number of countries as a crime. In India, it continues to be it is an illegality. It is a matrimonial wrong. It is a civil wrong. It is a quasi-criminal wrong under the Domestic Violence Act. However, it is not in strict sense a crime under the Indian Penal Code. Should the situation change? Should we have marital rape included under the Indian Penal Code as a specific offence, or should we have that the definition of section of the rape section in the IPC has one exception, and that exception is for a man having sexual intercourse with his own wife. Doing this, I'm sharing with you. There is a very interesting concept which is a mischief rule. Now, mischief rule is something that is applied. It is one of the tools of interpretation. It is from the interpretation law, and it is supposed to be mischief rule means that when a law has been brought, a law has been enacted, or a particular section has been added, what was the mischief that was existing prior to that amendment in law? What was the mischief that provision of law sought to curb, sought to in a way do away with, sought to control in any form by way of a law? So mischief test and mischief rule helps the justice delivery system to understand what was the mind of the lawmakers when they brought that particular law, and it is supposed to be a very important principle of interpretation of statutes. Now let us apply that test to marital rape. All of us agree, everyone agrees that marital rape is an abhorrent practice. It is something that does not have the sanction of law. It cannot stand in today's date and time when we talk about equal opportunity of right of self-determination for women. Why still do some of us feel that it cannot be added in the Indian Penal Code as a crime just yet? Now, when we talk about marital rape, what would we like curbed, or what would we like should be the problem that the law should aim at assuaging in any way? What we want is that there should be no sexual abuse of women in matrimonies, and we feel that if marital rape is included in the Indian Penal Code, then women will be able to say no to sexually abusive marriages and walk out of sexually abusive marriages without having to undergo the trauma, the humiliation, the harassment, and a violation of her very basic fundamental rights. Again, some of the statistics and data that we have on the kind of cruelty and oppression that happens in marriages, it is shocking to see that scores of women continue to stay in extremely cruel, oppressive, dead marriages where they are exploited not just sexually, they are exploited mentally, physically, socially, in every form of the way they are exploited. And still, many of those women cannot walk out of such marriages. You think by making marital rape as an offense under the Indian Penal Code, those women will be able to take action and they will be able to walk out of those abusive marriages? My humble opinion in this is that what is important is economic independence of women. What is important is the societal norm change that all of us need to have. Because a woman continues to live in an oppressive marriage only for these two reasons. Either it is the reason of a societal pressure. What will the society say? How will I bring up my children? What will my mother say? What will my mother-in-law say? What will my friends say? What will my workplace say? All sorts of questions that we feel are pressures from the society. And the second aspect of it is, if she walks out of an abusive marriage, where does she go? If she does not have the wherewithal, the means, the economic means to actually take care of her, maybe take care of her children if she has children with her. Now, when the cause of women living in abusive marriages is not because marital rape is not an offense under IPC. They continue to live in abusive marriages because of societal pressure and the economic means. So we should be addressing those rather than making marital rape as an offense. Now, we have to bear in mind that we are talking about a relationship where physical relations, sex is one of the bedrocks of that relationship. In fact, matrimonial relationship and physical relationship inside a matrimony has been understood to be so sacrosanct and so important for one another that even in judgments, Supreme Court has gone on to say that a marriage without sex is an anathema. And without not having any physical relationships, without any undue cause, actually also amounts to cruelty. And it can be taken as a matrimonial wrong and be a ground for asserting your matrimonial rights. That being the situation, we are talking about a relationship. Of course, people who do not want marital rape to be included as a crime at all, they also talk about the issue of implementation, which also cannot be completely glossed over. We have to bear in mind that implementation of not just implementation, but reporting, the standard of proof, and how the onus of proof is going to shift from one party to another. In a relationship where sex is supposed to be a pivotal point in the relationship, is a very serious issue which we need to find answers to. We can't have something as add something as an offense under the IPC theoretically, and then figure out that the implementation of it is extremely impractical, and it becomes counterproductive, and it creates more troubles than it can solve. That is the situation that we need to be very careful about. Also, I think one more thing that we need to bear in mind is that, after the Vishakha judgment came in 1996, when Supreme Court laid down guidelines, it is one of the few cases where the Supreme Court actually made law. So they laid down guidelines to curb sexual harassment of women at workplace. Of course, and they said that this will continue to have the force of law till law is made by the legislature. Of course, that law only came in 2013, 17 years later. And after that, we have the act. But we also see that now there is a increased clamor that is growing in the society with regard to making sexual harassment as gender neutral. There is a huge clamor that even men who suffer sexual harassment at workplaces, now sexual harassment is an offense which actually stems from unequal power equations between the two parties. People who are in a position of power, who are in a position to exert authority, they are the ones who indulge in sexual harassment of people who are subordinate to them or lower in the power equation. Therefore, there is no reason why sexual harassment should only be to help out women who are at the receiving end of sexual harassment at workplace. Also, domestic violence, though currently the Domestic Violence Act covers all women in the domestic household, but there is a very, very loud voice in favor of making domestic violence applicable even to men, because there are cases that are happening. Now, how do we want to grab these points and take it forward? Well, in my humble opinion, the point that I wish to make before all of you is marital rape is a very serious and a very heinous kind of a sexual abuse of women. It is a reality. It happens in societies across the world. Interestingly, we see that on gender issues, it really doesn't matter too much. The kind of issues that the fairer gender faces across the world are almost similar. In fact, just recently we had that battle in the Supreme Court for women who are soldiers, women who are officers in the Indian Army, Indian Air Force, and Indian Navy, fighting for their battle for permanent commission and command posts in the Indian Army, and similarly for Air Force and Navy, their permanent commission and some other benefits. Equal opportunities. That was a battle for equal opportunities. Even women who are supposedly empowered to be protecting the nation, to be stakeholders in national security and national integrity, have to fight for equal rights to them, right up to the Supreme Court of the country. That being the situation, things are bound to change. This is a journey. This is not a one-off incident, or this is not a 1 week issue, but this is a journey which the fairer gender has been waging for over a century now, and this journey is meant to go forward. However, we must be extremely careful, cautious, and circumspect as to how we apply it to our reality. I think we are getting quite out of time, and we have to take some questions also. So my perspective is that India is not ready right now to have marital rape as an IPC offense. It continues to be a matrimonial wrong, an illegality, a civil and partially criminal remedy available under the Domestic Violence Act. Maybe we should have gender neutral. Maybe we should have marital rape as an offense. We certainly should. Why maybe? We certainly should have it sometime in the near future. But till the time we are able to understand those peculiar conditions existing in India and do something about them, it could be counterproductive for the institution of marriage. and it is important to understand those follies before we jump into it. And surely I would like to see marital rape as an offence under the IPC. But some would also say that why rape should be an offence only against women. Rape itself should become a gender-neutral offence. Maybe sometime in future, maybe we have enough women in position of power. We have enough women in all walks of life who are on top of the power equation, and maybe there is a need for rape itself to become gender-neutral. But till then, we have to take one step at a time. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there are
of really no significance, and yes, we should really do away with restitution of conjugal rights because it has. If you can't force, you can't execute it, and how can you force somebody to love somebody?
There are a few more questions. One more question which I want to ask is: isn't the current situation of domestic violence actually proving to be toothless because the amount of conviction, the duration of conviction is very less. The maximum which can be a person can be convicted is for 6 months in the Domestic Violence Act. Isn't it toothless according to you?
Prashantji, I am a firm believer that it is not the length of the sentence or the severity of the sentence that becomes the reason for those offences not to slow down. You know, what I feel is that when somebody is committing a crime, whether it is a matrimonial crime, whether it is domestic violence, or even if it is more heinous offences of rape or murder, the perpetrator does not think how it is defined in a statute book, how it is punishable under the statute book, whether I will be subject to severe punishment or less severe punishment. We saw after the Nirbhaya, we saw that gravity of the sentence was added not just in the IPC, but under the POCSO Act also. Recently we saw amendments that severity of sentence. But did it really make any difference? The real there are 5 theories of punishment that we have seen. Deterrent is one theory, by severity of punishment is just one aspect of it. What is really more, that is why I talked about the mischief rule. We have to understand what is it that is stopping women to walk out of abusive marriages. Today, it's not like we have less laws or any paucity of laws. There are sufficient laws which are available to women to strengthen their hands. They continue to live in abusive marriages. That cause has to be eliminated. And that cause will be eliminated not just by laws, but by the social journey, the journey that all of us begin in our homes, on how we bring up our sons and how we bring up our daughters.
The third question I may ask the other members of the group, that is Bilal has asked a question. Bilal, you can unmute and ask the question.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is that how to make a woman understand that having sexual intercourse without her consent is a rape, even if it's after marriage. And if she's going through such a situation, what can be the remedies for it?
So Bilal,
Yes, ma'am.
without let me quote to you another judgment of Supreme Court, where Supreme Court was considering the case of a woman who was a habitual sex worker. So this was one of the defense that was taken from the accused, that she was a sex worker, and therefore there was no occasion for her to refuse to give consent. And the Supreme Court went on to say that even if she is a habitual sex worker, then also her no means no. If she has agreed to have a physical relationship with somebody at some point in time, that does not mean that it's a license for every time for that person or any other person to come. Similar is the case for sexual harassment or rape in a marriage. It is illegal. It is not accepted. It is a civil wrong. It is a matrimonial wrong. And it is a criminal wrong partially criminal wrong under the Domestic Violence Act. So the rights that are available to the woman are to walk out of that marriage or not walk out. Domestic Violence Act allows her a remedy of getting a residence, so she can continue to be in the same residence, or she can ask for another residence, maintenance, the same standard of life that she has been leading as a married woman. She can bring out action against her husband. This can be a ground of divorce. This can be a ground for custody of children. So all matrimonial remedies are available to her. But again, Bilal, please pay attention to the answer that I gave earlier. Why do women know this? Women know that no abuse our physical integrity in any way. That is not acceptable. That is illegal, and it cannot be done. However, if women are continuing in that position, the two things that really need to change is economic independence and social pressures.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Manpreet Kaur. Bilal, you can mute. The next question is by Manpreet Kaur.
Yeah. Good afternoon, ma'am. Ma'am, as we see that, how much ever we speak about equality, women being in very powerful positions, but if we go to see, in the real sense, we still continue to be a patriarchal society in its core sense. So, don't you feel there is a need for us to first, reach that status of equality and then talk about having gender-neutral laws? We have suffered over the years and have fought to come up to this. And when men are getting a pinch of it, I think 1% of it, and they come with this hue and cry that let's make it gender-neutral. Even in these times of COVID-19, we have seen the increasing cases of domestic violence. The statistics have shown us, over a very petty thing of the woman defeating the husband in a game of Ludo. Have insight on this aspect of it, ma'am. Thank you.
I completely agree with you, Manpreet. That's a very relevant comment that you have made. It's not really a question, but you have made a very interesting observation and comment. You're perfectly right, and I concur with you completely in saying, and that's how the equality law is understood under the Constitution. It's equal treatment of equals. If you have a equal treatment of unequals, then you are perpetrating inequality. And why the Constitution talks about affirmative action for women and children, and of course the other backward classes and scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, but women and children fall in that special category of the Constitution mandating affirmative action by the states because of centuries of oppression, centuries of inequality, which continues even till today. Manpreet, I mentioned that judgment that it was one of my cases only where we fought for women officers of the Indian Army for permanent commission and command positions. It was incredible, the same kind of excuses that were being given. In fact, when I said that I would like, to see gender neutral laws in the future, I meant that, the society becomes, the nation becomes and it's not just Indian society. Gender battles are something that have the same color and complexion. It's uncanny resemblance of these issues across the world, and I would like to see more power to the fairer gender. And it's not a battle between you and me, or man versus woman, or a boy versus girl. No, we all have to coexist, but coexist on equal terms, on equal rights of self-determination, on equality in true spirit and purport. So thank you very much for that thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Manpreet.
Thank you, ma'am.
The next question is by Priya Ratnani. In fact, she has a very good question to ask. Priya, you can go unmute and ask. Hello. Can Priya hear me? Hello. I'll ask her question. She has put a question. Under what provision man can file domestic violence? Any case law?
No, right now the law does not permit. The definition of a victim came up for interpretation before the Supreme Court, and very clearly it has been said that it covers the women who are in domestic relationships. So, but it's not just for the wives in the matrimony, it is for all domestic relationships, includes live-in relationships, live-in partners, the wife, the lady in the partner, and for other ladies. But the law is not there, and we haven't reached that status of equality for us to have really gender neutral laws.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is by Cherian Kunjumun Marthukullam. Cherian, can you unmute and ask the question, or should I read it for you? I'll read the question. The question is, do we have a real independent mechanism to air voices of victims with absolute secrecy and safety?
Well, the media houses sometimes carry these stories. There are anonymous stories that are carried in the media. But if you are looking at a remedy in law, then it is not possible to be anonymous and have a remedy in law as a victim. Of course, you can hear the voices in media, you can hear their stories, the faces are blurred, or they're blackened out, or stories are carried anonymously. But if you are looking at a remedy against the oppressor, the accused, then the fair trial, the rule of law, has to be given to that person. You can't make allegations without disclosing. But you must bear this in mind that under the Indian law, and also which has been made more stringent after the Nirbhaya amendments, it is not permissible for anybody to disclose the name and the identity of the victims of sexual abuse of any kind, and that is why we know Nirbhaya is Nirbhaya and not the name that she had. So yes, stories can be told, but remedy is not possible anonymously.
Thank you, ma'am. One more question. There is one question by Akshita. If Akshita is hearing me, she can unmute, or else I'll ask a question. There is a growing discourse about fake domestic violence and dowry cases. Could you please share your insights on this?
Well, I can tell you from our experience that matrimony is a relationship that is based on trust, based on friendship, and it does become very unfair when parties battle. It's not like in every matrimony people do have the maturity to fight battles in a objective manner. In fact, matrimonial battles, when they come in the courts of law, they become very bitter, they become very rude, because it's a relationship of love. And when the relationship of love goes sour, then it becomes extremely ugly also in the courts of law. And yes, we see it's not just from the woman's side alone. We see that false cases or false stories or false sections are foisted by both sides. Now, the highlight is more of abuse by women's side because more rights are available to the woman in the matrimony. So that being the position, all those cases are foisted. But we have to come to a no-fault divorce kind of a theory also, because we can't allow the youth of our country who can't get on with marriage. If a marriage has gone wrong, that doesn't mean that somebody is an accused and somebody is a victim always. It's not necessary. Where that is the case of temperamental differences, people should have the maturity to stand up and, like it happens, no-fault theory in the developed world, how it happens is whatever all the matrimonial assets are divided equally between both the sides, and you don't have to say that what was the fault of anybody. There's a no-fault theory, and you can have a equitable divorce without any unruffling of feathers. So that should also come with time, I believe.
I will take two more questions. One, I think I'll ask it quickly. It is from Kiran Ashri. Should family court matters be heard by division bench or two judges? Because many judges are inclined emotionally to situation narrated powerfully rather objective.
In my view, our family courts are working in a very conducive environment, and now the amendments that are made to try settlement and conciliation proceedings, they are also very child-friendly courts, because often in custody battles you see young children being dragged into the court proceedings. But I don't think we need to have division benches. See, family courts are the first courts of recourse for family matters. Thereafter, when the matters come up at the High Court level and the division bench level, then of course there are more than one judges in combinations who are sitting.
The next question, I think the last question. This is from Mehul. does the domestic violence or marital rape, for that matter, require special provisions for interim measures like separation for peaceful living beyond the way courts are handling it today? Is there a possibility of interim measures other than the court orders?
See, for interim measures also, we have to go to the court of law. See, understand that there would have been no reason to come to a court of law if the parties were equitable in dealing with their relationships. It's when somebody is wrong, then they come to the court. In India, you don't see luxury litigation that people come to courts just for the sake of it. It's the last of the places that somebody wants to come to. Interim measures is very, very important, more so in India, which has the dubious distinction of having cases dragging to not just years but decades. It is said that the closest thing to infinity is a civil proceeding in India, in Indian courts anywhere, and it's a dubious distinction. But since we have that, it is all the more important to have interim measures. But we have to go to court of law to get those interim measures also.
Maybe can we take one last question? We have one minute.
Sure.
One Labdeep Parikh has asked a question, or it's a comment. Ma'am, don't you think societal pressure and mentality can be changed only if law is in place, which is missing in our system? Why is law not at place even after knowing the situation?
Well, my opinion on this is that law does not exist in isolation. If you make a law when the society is not ready for it, then that law is followed in its aberration mode. Let me give you some examples. We have had now laws which bar child marriages. We have had those laws for 30, 40 years. But do we still see on the occasions of Akshaya Tritiya, there are hundreds of child marriages still happening in the heartlands of our country, and not just in rural areas, but also in areas which are supposed to have educated people. So I think the mindset of the society, this is a process that goes hand in hand. You can't just make a law and expect that everyone is going to follow it. You have to have the society standing up, awareness, also some mandate of law, and then that is the right balance to have.
Thank you, ma'am, for patiently giving the lecture and patiently listening to the questions. Some of them were relevant, some of them are beyond the topic, but yes, I thank you for your patient time and the valuable time which you have given. I think it's exactly 5 p.m. as I had told.
Unfortunately, I have another webinar with Manipal University, so I have to jump onto that. But I wish that I should have kept my own lecture slightly more shorter, so that I could have taken more questions. But maybe I think this lockdown is going to be a long drawn process. Maybe we can do this another time.
Yes,
Great questions and great interaction. And next time, let's make it completely interactive. Let's make a question-answer webinar.
Perfectly all right. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.